Hey everyone, my name is David. I'm here with my friend and colleague David from the US. I'm broadcasting today from Bogota, as it has always been for the last couple of weeks. Aquí el tiempo está muy bonito. Hace mucho sol aquí en Bogotá. Hey David, how are you in the US?
I'm very good. Thanks for asking, David. Hace el tiempo no es tan bueno porque está lloviendo. It's raining here, pero estoy feliz porque yo acabo de visitar a mi hermano en Carolina del Norte. I just got back from visiting my brother in North Carolina this past weekend, which was a lot of fun. So I feel refreshed and renewed. So happy to be here. Sorry we missed you last week. We're just ready to be back and interacting with you all, answering your questions, presenting a mini lesson. So just really looking forward to it this week.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, David. I have a question for you in Spanish. ¿Cómo está la situación en Estados Unidos?
La situación está está cambiándose muy rápido. It's changing really quickly. Pero las condiciones son complejos o complejas, yo diría. The conditions are a little complex or complicadas. Las circunstancias son difíciles, claro. The circumstances are difficult, pero estamos pensando en cómo cambiar nuestra sociedad para mejorarla. Lo siento. So we're thinking of all these grand discussions of how to change society. It's a lot of big questions. But you'll notice that I just got I said mejorarlo, and I meant to say mejorarla when I was referring to la sociedad. And that is actually the topic of today's broadcast is direct object pronouns and indirect object pronouns. So even I make mistakes with those sometimes, as you notice I just did. So we're going to dive into what it means to take a noun like la sociedad, the society, and reduce it to a pronoun and use it that way. But before we begin, I think we should go over the example question from 2 weeks ago, because we talked about the differences between por y para, and we presented our viewers with an example sentence that we can post on the screen.
Here. It's here on the screen, David.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I was about to copy and paste it.
Just for us to review what we saw 2 weeks ago, we learned a bit more about the difference between the prepositions por and para, which both mean for in English. So we studied the cases, the contexts, and the main keys in order to know what preposition we should use in Spanish. And we had this little homework for you. So let's review a little bit here what prepositions we should use in both blanks. Tengo que ir, este barrio, visitar a mi tía. So I have to go, this neighbor, visit my aunt. You can maybe write the prepositions, one por para, two por para, and then we have a look. Let's remember that we use por mainly to indicate reasons or to indicate the means of something, whereas para is the end, the destination, the goal. So that's how we can also remember when to use por and when to use para.
Yeah, I'm so curious to see what answers come in, because this is one that would definitely trip me up if I saw this on a test or something like that. It can be very tricky to know the difference between por and para.
Yeah. We saw also cases where we can use both, but the meaning changes. So this is
Mhm.
also something that we should keep in mind also for this very short example. So we already see Carol, Jerry, Lee, Lindsay posting some answers. Um, Maybe we should go for the answer that Carol is posting, or Jerry, por, para. So here, Carol says por, then para. So let's go back to the sentence, por and then para. So if we put por the first blank, tengo que ir por este barrio, and then para visitar a mi tía, I think that makes sense in Spanish.
I
That's
think so too. That's what I would say. And I would interpret that or translate that sentence as I have to go through this neighborhood. So it's the route or the means
mhm,
by which I'm getting to my aunt, para visitar, in
mhm,
order to visit my aunt. But
yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning, David, that I think you can get away with saying por y para for both of the blanks here.
Mhm,
And if you think about tengo que ir para este barrio, that would mean to me I have to go to this neighborhood or towards this neighborhood in the direction of this neighborhood. I'm not in it yet and I'm not walking through it yet, but I'm going in that direction.
mhm,
That's more in line with para. And then por visitar a mi tía, you might hear much less often than para visitar because para visitar is the purpose or the objective in order to visit my aunt. But Wendy actually asks a very valid question here, and she says, "Is visiting an aunt a reason or an objective?" And it's important to clarify because you could mean either or. So
mhm,
if visiting your aunt is the reason that you're going through or towards this neighborhood, you might choose por instead, por visitar. But I think most people would say para because they're interpreting the sentence as in order to visit my aunt, I'm going to go through or to this neighborhood.
yeah, exactly. So if you say tengo que ir para este barrio, I can also understand as a Spanish native speaker that my aunt is living in that neighborhood as well. So that's the destination. That's how I could also interpret this if I choose the preposition para in this case. So I think we've got it. Um, Many of our learners, viewers, can already understand the difference between por and para, and I think we are ready to jump into the next topic that we prepared for you for today. Um, but before we get started with the topic, I would like to add a question here for David. ¿Cómo te sientes hoy? How do you feel today?
Gracias por preguntarme. Thanks for asking me. Yo me siento bien. Estoy feliz, como yo dije. I feel good, like I just said. Um, Notice that I used the verb me siento to say I feel, and that comes from the infinitive form sentirse, or to feel, which, if you remember from a few weeks ago, is what we call a reflexive verb. So, reflexive verbs, if you remember, are ones that refer back to the subject of whoever's doing the verb. So, when David asks me, ¿Cómo te sientes? He's saying, how do you yourself feel? That's one way to think about it. And when I answer, yo me siento feliz o bien, I feel happy, I feel good, I conjugate the verb in the yo form, siento, yo siento, but then I have to put the me, that little pronoun, reflexive pronoun, me, in front of the verb, yo me siento.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. So those are the reflexive verbs. Those are verbs that we use in Spanish to reflect on the same subject. I feel myself, I don't know, good. So that's how these verbs work both in English and Spanish. It's worth also mentioning that there are many reflexive verbs in Spanish that are not reflexive in English, and I wouldn't say it's the other way around, the same case. So that means that in Spanish we tend to use these reflexive pronouns quite more often than in English. So we saw how to conjugate. Let's have a look at a second example sentence that we prepare for you today. Let's have a look at another verb, which is relajarse, to relax. So in Spanish, when we say, for example, I'm relaxing in the park, or they relax in the park, as the example sentence says here, I'm gonna post it here. I need this reflexive pronoun, that little word, which is se. Ellos se relajan en el parque. This little reflexive pronoun comes also or adapts to the person that is the subject in the sentence. In this case, ellos. As David mentioned before, if I'd like to ask David, for example, are you relaxing in the park? I would ask, ¿te relajas? ¿Te relajas en el parque? So let's keep this in mind. Let's review briefly the conjugation of these reflexive verbs with the verb llamarse, which is to be called, or yeah, that's what we use to introduce ourselves. So if I say my name is, or I'm called, then I would say yo me llamo. And we see here yo in brackets because, as we mentioned also in one of the previous episodes, we drop the personal pronoun in those cases where it's clear what the subject is. So me llamo, it's perfectly enough to say my name is, I'm called David. Tú te llamas. So in this case, we have te llamas for the personal pronoun tú. And again, we can drop it. We can drop the personal pronoun tú. And we have for the third person, él, ella, or usted, the verb form se llama. For example, I don't know, mi padre se llama Jorge. But what if we are addressing a group of people, or if I'm saying we are called? So then we say nos llamamos. We use this very little word nos, accompanied by the verb llamamos. And the same goes for vosotros, which is plural, formal, informal in Spain. Only in Spain, vosotros, vosotras, os llamáis. But in that case, we would use ustedes in Latin America. And for ustedes, ellos, and ellas, we have the verb se llaman. That's how we can conjugate a reflexive verb with all the personal pronouns. If we have a name, for example, David, Juan, Miguel, then we use the corresponding verb form. In this case, Miguel se relaja en el parque, for example.
So we've talked about reflexive verbs, but now what about verbs where the subject of the action does something to someone else or to something else? So instead of me calling myself something, what if I call David on the telephone? Or what if David gives me something? Or what if he eats an apple? There's so many verbs, very, very many verbs in Spanish, in situations in which the subject is going to be doing something or passing on an action to something else. And so just like we have pronouns called reflexive pronouns in Spanish that refer back to the self, we also have pronouns called object pronouns that refer to someone or something else that is the recipient of an action. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And the good news is that when you're learning these object pronouns, a lot of them are actually the same as they would be for the reflexive pronouns. There are 4 that are the same exact pronouns you'd use. So they are me, te, nos, os, which you'll recognize as me for the first person singular in the instance of yo me llamo, or tú te llamas. Nos llamamos, we call ourselves, or os llamáis, y'all call yourselves. So these don't actually have to be learned anew because they're the same ones that you've seen before, which is, I think it makes it a lot easier when you're thinking about moving from reflexive to object pronouns.
Yeah, I think, David, that we can make it here clearer if we show an example. So we just saw how to conjugate the verb llamarse, which is a reflexive verb, to introduce yourself. But what if we use the verb llamar uh, with a different meaning? So here we see, yo te llamo todos los días. I call you every day. So here we are taking the verb llamar, and this verb means in English to call. So if it's not reflexive, it means to call someone. Yo llamo a mi padre, or yo te llamo todos los días. That's how it works. So here we see that me llamo, it's not always together as a couple. We can also change the person we are addressing. And in this case, we also change the meaning of that verb. So I call you every day. Um, so it is also important to understand this. Who is the person, or what's the thing that's doing something, or who is doing something? This is the subject. And if I'm the object, the direct object, then I'm going to use a reflexive pronoun, because this is reflecting on myself. If I'm calling someone else, if I'm doing something else, then I'm doing an action that it's going to affect a different person, or someone else or something else. Let's have a look at another example where we see that uh, the reflexive pronoun is also the same as the object pronoun. So here we recognize the word nos. Um, Ellos nos visitan hoy, which means they are visiting us today. So in this case, nos means us in English. They are visiting us today. And that's how we build this sentence. Both reflexive and object pronouns come always before the verb. Um, it's a bit different in English. So in this case, we have ellos nos visitan today. So as you mentioned, David, we have four words that are both reflexive pronouns and object pronouns. Let's um, show them here on the screen. Me, te, nos, and os. It's very important, because then we have also kind of the question, okay, but sometimes we see me, te, se, le, lo, les, and all these pronouns, these little words that are also kind of a bit annoying, because we don't understand when they need to be used, and yeah, where they are correct. And that's why we also prepare more sentences. But before we I think before we get started with these differences, let's review this concept that we just explained with more examples. So here we have, for example, nosotros compramos un coche. I think we just started with the differences, because in this case we are gonna learn. So let's get back here, mete, nos, os, which are the same. Sorry, now we start with the differences. So when do we use lo, la, le, and the corresponding plural forms? So let's start with this example. So David, nosotros compramos un coche. Nosotros lo compramos. What does this lo refer to in the sentence?
So you can see that the only differences between the two sentences in this case are whether you use the word un coche, a car, or whether you use lo in its place. And of course, you notice that you have to move the lo to right before the verb. But the lo, you can see, kind of stands in for or represents the word un coche. And if you know your gender and your number in Spanish, you know that un coche is a masculine singular noun. So when you have a masculine singular noun that is the direct object of some action, some verb, in this case, comprar, to buy, that means that the direct object pronoun that's going to take its place is lo. So lo can only stand in for singular masculine nouns. If you know your Spanish number and gender, you know that you can have two different genders of nouns, feminine and masculine, and you can also have singular number and plural number. So that gives us a grand total of four different situations: masculine singular, masculine plural, feminine singular, and feminine plural, in which you'll have to use direct object pronouns. But keep in mind that lo only applies to masculine singular. I think it'd be helpful if we showed another example of a different instance in which you don't have a masculine singular noun like in coche, but something different.
Let's go for it. ¿Tienes la revista de Carlos? And then you can answer, sí, la tengo, or sí, yo la tengo. And here we see that the word is la. That's the word that we use to refer to la revista de Carlos. That's the whole noun that we are trying to replace here by using this pronoun. Do you have Carlos magazine? Yes, I have it. So in this case, we see that la revista is a noun that is female, singular, and that's why we use la. So let's go back here to the example. If we are talking about el coche, then I say lo, compramos. If we are talking about la revista, then we replace this revista with la tengo. And I think this is pretty straightforward. What happens if we have several objects that we are referring to and we want to replace it by direct object pronoun, David? So let's show this example. ¿Dónde pusiste los libros?
Yo los puse en la mesa. So where did you put the books? I put them on the table. So you likely know that el libro is a masculine noun, but when you see it in the form los libros, that's not singular anymore, it's plural. So you have a masculine plural noun that you want to turn into a direct object pronoun. In that case, you're going to use los. So, ¿dónde pusiste los libros? Yo los puse en la mesa. That one feels pretty good to me to keep track of and to remember, because los is also the definite article that means the in front of a masculine plural noun like libros. So it's pretty easy to remember. Okay, well, if I want to make los libros or another masculine plural noun into a direct object pronoun, it's going to be los, which is the same definite article that you'd see before the noun.
And the same applies for nouns that are female also in the feminine, in the plural. So yo tengo las flores para la fiesta. Yo las tengo para la fiesta. So here we see that we also drop the noun flores, and then we can just take the article and make an object pronoun out of it. And that's how it works. So in this case, we are talking about different verbs like, for example, comprar, so someone buys something, or tener, someone has something, or poner, someone puts something, or again, tener. So this is how these verbs work. So we have a verb, we have a subject, and we have a direct object that we can replace by with an object pronoun. So this is this is how it works. Let's show another example where we see how we can replace these direct objects in a larger sentence. Yo doy el chocolate a mi padre. And here we have the verb dar, which is kind of irregular. So yo doy, I give the chocolate to my father. Yo doy el chocolate. So here we have two options. Here we can replace el chocolate. Yo lo doy a mi padre, as we saw in the first example where we were talking about buying a car, el coche, and here again, yo lo doy a mi padre, I give it to my father. But what happens if we want to replace, if we want to use a object pronoun instead of saying a mi padre, because it's already known in the context that I'm talking about him. So how can we do that? And that here is where we use le. So it is very important to understand that lo and la are direct object pronouns, and le is an indirect object pronoun. What's the difference between direct and indirect object in Spanish and in English, David? Do you know?
So this is something that you might have learned in English grammar classes. But when you learn a new language like Spanish, you come across this too. It can be a little bit confusing, but the way I think about it is a direct object pronoun is kind of in the name, it's the direct recipient of an action. So if I have a verb like give, it's what's being given. If I have a verb like eat, it's what's being eaten. It's the noun or the object that is directly impacted by the verb itself. Whereas an indirect object, you don't always find it with verbs like eat, because eat can only take one object. I eat the apple, I eat the dinner. But when you have verbs like give, that can have something that is given and something to whom that thing is given, then you have a direct object, what's given, and an indirect object, which is receiving the object that's being given. So it's kind of like, I like to think of it as you can't really have an indirect object without a direct object. And you think of other verbs that have two objects as, I mean, give is a great example, to tell someone something. So what's being told, like a story or the truth, that would be a direct object. But to whom are you telling a story? To whom are you telling the truth? That's the indirect object. So it's helpful to think of maybe direct objects as the lower tier, and then indirect objects you can build on and have a higher tier, but you can't have an indirect object up here without a direct object below it. So direct objects might be a little more simpler for that reason, but indirect objects are just as important if you have verbs that take two objects like the ones I just said.
That's correct, David. That's really nice. So basically, to sum up, a direct object is the object that's being affected by the action, and the indirect object is the object or even the person that's who's benefiting from the action. So he's not doing anything. My father is not doing anything, but he gets a chocolate from me. That's how we can work with this pronoun. So in this case, lo and la are going to be used for object pronouns, direct object pronouns, and le is going to be used for indirect objects. But let's practice these concepts with a new example here that we brought for you. Mi hermana regala la lámpara a Paula. So my sister gives the lamp to Paula. So if we want to say, if we don't want to use la lámpara and we want to say, we want to use a personal pronoun instead of that because we've been talking about the lamp for hours, then I can also say mi hermana. What do you think is the right answer? La, lo, le.
So keep in mind when you're thinking about this question that a verb like regalar, to gift something, takes two objects, as you can see. So one object is the lamp that's being given, and one object is Paula, the recipient or the beneficiary of the gift of the lamp. So when you're thinking, which role does the lamp play? Is it a direct object? Is it an indirect object? Think about who is the recipient and what is being given, and then you can go from there. So it looks like we're seeing a lot of really good answers in the comments. I'm seeing, I'll go ahead and put up Lee's answer on the screen. Lee says la, and that's correct because we know that the lamp is the direct object. It's what's being given, what's being directly affected by the action of gifting. And because it's a singular feminine noun, la lámpara, you turn it into the direct object la. So mi hermana la regala a Paula.
That's correct. That's correct. But here you have another case using also the same sentence where we are replacing a different object. So in this case, if you read it through very carefully, we see that the gap that we have here in front of the verb regalar, which is to give, is referring to a different object. Mi hermana regala la lámpara a Paula. So we can see here, mi hermana regala la lámpara. Who is the recipient of this sentence? A Paula. So let me ask you this. What's the right object pronoun here? Lo, la, or le? What do you think? So we already see some answers. This is really nice to see that Jerry, Lisa, Dana, Lee, they posted all le. So if we go back to the sentence and we add le as Jerry, Lisa, Dana, Lee suggest, then we would have the sentence mi hermana le regala la lámpara, which is correct. That's right. So it's great to see that we can start recognizing the difference between the direct object, the affected object in the sentence, and the recipient in that sentence, which is the indirect object, and how we can replace these objects with the corresponding pronouns. But maybe we have a last case where we are talking about many objects, many people. What happens if we have, for example, the sentence, ¿Qué hago con mis hijos? What do I do with my children? And here we have the verb to tell, which is decir in Spanish. So as we were explaining before, you tell something to someone. In this case, the verb has the same logic in Spanish. So we have the answer, les digo una historia, or les cuento una historia. I'll tell them a story. So in this case, we have a direct object, which is a story, una historia, and we have a pronoun, an indirect object pronoun, which is les. What are we referring here to, David, with les?
We're referring to mis hijos, my children. So it actually becomes a little bit easier to think of indirect object pronouns when you're choosing between or choosing which one to use, because you might have noticed that the only indirect object pronouns that refer to third person groups, so that's like él, ella, usted, or ellos, ellas, ustedes, you can only choose between le for the singular or les for the plural. And that makes it pretty straightforward. With direct object pronouns for the third person forms, you have lo, la, los, and las. So there's a couple more to choose from. And those are separated by gender. But le and les apply to both masculine and feminine nouns. So it makes it a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah. So we have the sentence, the easy sentence, do you have the books? Yes, I have them. Here we need to keep the agreement in gender and number for libros, los libros. So just to sum up, we have different object pronouns, which are all even the same as the reflexive pronouns, as we saw in the beginning, me, te, nos, os. Those are both reflexive and object pronouns. So I can also say te digo una historia, for example, as we saw here in the example. Instead of les digo una historia, I can say te digo una historia. I tell you a story. And we have those pronouns that are very specific for direct and indirect objects, which are lo, la, and the corresponding plural forms, los, las. And for indirect objects, we have le, if it's singular, regardless of the gender, and les for plural nouns. Yeah, as we see here with les digo una historia. So I hope that this is all now clear for you. You can post your questions. Let us know if you still have some issues with this topic. We know that this is a difficult one, and this is the introduction to something that's a bit more complicated because, as you know, Spanish is an official language in more than 20 countries. So how we use them also depends on the region. But I think it's important to say that you shouldn't get confused by that. This is the main rule. This is valid for all the countries, for all the varieties, both in Latin America and in Spain. And any other case is rather an exception. But this is the basic rule. And if we understand this, we are ready to go with pronouns in general, both reflexive and direct and indirect object pronouns. Another thing is that this also gets a bit more complicated when we have two pronouns in the same sentence to replace both direct and indirect objects. But we are going to learn a bit more about how to use them and how to place them in the sentence in one of our future episodes.
And that's exactly the question that I see Dana and Gail asking a little bit earlier. Dana says, can you have an indirect object pronoun and a direct pronoun object in the same sentence? What does that look like? Yo le lo doy. And then Gail says, could you say, I gave him it? So these are both the same question, just asking different ways. And it's a very valid question, a very good one. The answer is yes, you can have, you can say something like, I gave him it, or you can have two object pronouns, both direct and indirect in the same sentence. But the rules that kind of govern how these object pronouns interact can be a bit tricky. So like David said, we can come back to those in a future episode. But just for now, know that yes, you're totally allowed to have these two direct object pronouns, direct and indirect object pronouns in the same sentence. We just wanted to give you kind of the foundations for using them both individually before we combine them.
Yeah.
Because that leads into a whole other discussion, a whole can of worms.
I think as a sneak peek, we can display this sentence, yo se lo doy, which is very simple. We don't want you to get confused. This is just a little example of how we can use two pronouns in the same sentence. In this case, we take se instead of le to avoid something that is called cacophony. So to avoid saying yo le lo doy, in Spanish, we change that le and we say instead of that se. But we don't want you to get confused because we just saw that we have reflexive pronouns, that some of them are also used as direct and indirect pronouns. And we just learn the difference between lo, la, le, and the corresponding plural forms los, las, les. So this is a sneak peek. We are going to get a bit more, I would say, deeper into this topic in one of our next episodes. So stay tuned.
Great. So while you all think of more questions to ask, if you have some, if not, that's great too. We're going to go ahead and post some example sentences to work through about today's topic, and we'll leave you with one as homework.
That's correct. Maybe we should start quickly. We have here the sentence, yo quiero la tarta de fresa. And then David could say, yo también quiero. What word can we use here? So please post your answers, your guesses. So here we are talking about the cake, la tarta de fresa, the strawberry cake. Yo también quiero.
Yeah, I see a lot of great right answers rolling in. Let's go ahead and highlight Jerry's answer. He says la. And that is correct. So we're saying, I want the strawberry cake. Someone else responds, I also want it. How do you say it? Well, there are, because it's a direct object pronoun, there are 4 different options. Well, actually for it, there would just be lo and la. For them, you could say los or las, but we're saying it, the strawberry cake, which is feminine, singular. So that is la. Yo también la quiero.
Cool.
Good job to everyone.
This is great. But what if we have a direct object, which is in the plural form? ¿Cuándo vas a traer los limones? When are you going to bring the lemons? I'll bring later. Yo traigo más tarde. What would the right answer be here in that sentence? It's great to see many answers that are all correct. This is great. So let's highlight here the answer given by Ina. Yo los traigo más tarde. Yo los traigo más tarde. This is correct. Because here we are talking about the lemons. Cuando vas a traer los limones, yo los traigo más tarde. I'll bring them later. This is amazing. So as always, we have also a third sentence that we would like you to have a look later during this week. We will review it next week. Let me display it here for you on the screen. Tengo que comprar un regalo para mi padre. So let's remember the meaning of the verb comprar, which is to buy. So, ¿por qué no compras una computadora? So this is our homework for next Tuesday. We will have a quick review before we explain a new topic. And we all hope that this topic is now clear to you. We know that this is very challenging when learning Spanish, but please let us know if you have any questions, if you have also suggestions or doubts.
So we can wait a little bit if you have any remaining questions. Oh, it looks like Troy's asking a question. Tarde means late or later, right? That's right. So más tarde means later, directly translates as more late, but that's the perfect way to say later. So yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I think I confused that in an earlier episode. Temprano y tarde, early and late, I get mixed up all the time. So, well, while we're waiting for more questions to come through, if you have any, we'll just say thank you so much for joining us week after week. I love to see some of the same names and faces come back every week. It's really encouraging. We hope these are helpful. Keep commenting, telling us what you want to hear from us. We really like to listen to your feedback as we prepare for future episodes. In the meantime, connect with us on social media at Babel USA, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and follow us on Quora and our space, Everything Language, and I can drop the link there too. We're out and about looking for your questions to answer and to help you make the most of your language learning experience, whether it's Spanish or another language that we offer. We are so excited to help you. We think it'll be just a really, really great time to come back next week and the week after and answer your questions. And then also check out Babel Magazine, where we have a lot of cool articles too about Spanish, other languages, all sorts of language learning topics. All right.
I think we don't have any questions. I think this topic was also very long. We can also give our learners some time to digest this. And in the meantime, you can also keep posting comments, questions. We will go through them as well, and we will try to reply to all of them. And yeah, stay tuned for the next episode next Tuesday, same time. Um, I'm always very excited also to meet you here, to explain things, to talk about Spanish, Espanol. And I'm already looking forward to next Tuesday. It's great to have you here, David, as well. Thank you very much
Yeah, of course.
for your
Good to be
help.
with you, David, and thanks for your great explanations. Um, be sure to invite your friends if you think these are helpful. We would love to have as many viewers as possible. Um, so just let everyone you know about these broadcasts and these sessions, because we'd love to just keep engaging as many people as possible. So I think that's it for this week. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in. And like David said, we'll catch you next Tuesday, a week from now at 1 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. See you next Tuesday.
Bye, everyone.